Hello once more, and a very warm welcome to Nesta's Bio Academy. And today we are going to go through our second lesson in the topic of support and movement. And today we are going to look at the skeletons and locomotion in bony fishes. The main objective of this lesson is that by the end of it, you need to be able to describe the various types of skeletons and the important roles they play in animals. We also need to be able to describe locomotion in bony fishes at the end. Now, in animals, support, unlike plants, in animals, support is always achieved by the presence of a rigid support framework. So this rigid support framework in animals is what we are referring to as a skeleton. And you always have three main types of skeletons in animals. These ones are exoskeleton, we have endoskeleton, and we have what we refer to as the hydrostatic skeleton. We will largely look at the first two, but of course we are going to mention something briefly about the third type of skeleton there. Why is it important for animals to have a skeleton? Now, skeletons usually perform a very critical role in animals, and some of the roles they play in animals include the fact that they are critical in giving the organisms their definite shapes, and also they provide support to the organism's weight. It enables the organisms to support their weight. The skeleton is also very important in providing surface for muscle attachment. Remember, it's the coordination of the muscles, the contractions and relaxation of the muscles in coordination with the bones and the skeleton that will bring about movement. At the same time, the skeletal framework also becomes vital in providing surface for attachment and suspension of the organs of the animals. Most of the times also the skeleton becomes very important in providing protection to the internal delicate organs. Like your brain is well protected by the bones of the skull, which are part of the skeleton. The bones of your ribs forming part of the skeleton perform a critical role in protecting your heart, protecting your lungs, and the other delicate organs you have. The exoskeleton in particular is also made up of waterproof material, and this makes the exoskeleton very important in minimizing water loss in the organisms that possess it. And of course, the bones which make up the endoskeleton, in their bone marrows is where we always have synthesis of the blood cells. Talk about the red blood cells, the white blood cells that are always synthesized here, making the skeleton quite important. And of course, the bones forming up the endoskeleton are important because they form good reservoirs for mineral salts. So this makes the skeleton to have quite important roles in animals. And of course, you can see there that we will later on see there are minor differences between them. And that is why you can find endoskeleton specifically having different roles than what you find in exoskeleton. So we are going to explore these types of skeletons further, but very briefly. Now, starting with the exoskeleton, this is a type of skeleton in which you find the skeleton is external to the muscles. That is, the outermost structure in the organism is the skeleton, and then the muscles are found attached to the inside of the skeleton. And this is always very commonly seen in arthropods. Remember in Form 3, when we're looking at the distinguishing features of the phylum Arthropoda, one of the features you listed must have been the fact that they possess an exoskeleton. So this is a skeleton in which is the skeleton is external to the muscles, so we can say the muscles are internal to the skeleton. And this is very common in arthropods, as we've just said, and it is always made up of chitin, which is a complex polysaccharide. This chitin is always secreted by epidermal cells in the bodies of the arthropods, and once it is secreted, it hardens. And after hardening, it increases protection to the arthropods. And as we said, it's waterproof, and this makes it very critical in minimizing desiccation or water loss to the organisms. Now, we are saying it is being produced by the epidermal cells. And one thing that you need to always note about exoskeleton is that it is always periodically shed off. In a short while, we are going to understand the reason why, the significance of this. Why do arthropods have to periodically shed off the exoskeleton? Do they need a change of clothes? Okay. Now, once the exoskeleton is shed off, like you can see for this case of cockroach here, you can see immediately it is shedding off the exoskeleton. It is very white. This is not something the cockroach desires because in this state it becomes more exposed to the predators. And of course, the level of desiccation will be significantly higher. And you can see after chitin has been secreted and it has hardened, it now gives it back the dark hue. And the dark hue is very important in giving the cockroach the good camouflage it requires in the dark places, ensuring the predators are not able to spot it easily. But one thing that is important to note is we are saying while the chitin is always evenly distributed around the body of the arthropod, we always have very thin deposition of the chitin at the joints. This means at the points where the legs, the appendages, the legs are joined to the main body, and even the antennae, at those points, you always have very thin secretions of chitin. Significance here is that this is going to allow movement at the joints, because if we were to have very thick secretions of chitin at these points, when the chitin hardens, it's also going to harden the appendages as well, and this is going to restrict the movement of these appendages at those joints. So we were just stated that the exoskeleton is always periodically shed off. Could you be in the know of the reason why the arthropods have to periodically shed off this protective case they have? Okay. So the exoskeleton, remember, is non-living. It's made up of non-living tissue, but the organism it is protecting on the inside is living. It's a living tissue. This means once the organism grows into the case and fills up the exoskeleton is going to limit the growth of the organism. So because of this, the arthropods have to always periodically shed it off in a process we refer to as molting or ecdysis. Other than the exoskeleton, the other type of skeleton is the endoskeleton, like what we have. And the endoskeleton is internal to the muscles. Like in our bodies, you always find the muscles to the outside and the components of the skeleton are found to the inside. Unlike the exoskeleton, the endoskeleton is made up of living tissues. Hence, as a result, it grows together with the organism, hence eliminating the need for us to have our skeleton being renewed or being replaced every time. And this is very common in phylum Chordata. All the vertebrates tend to have the endoskeleton. So what are the main components of the endoskeleton? The endoskeleton is largely made up of bones. It's made up of ligaments. It's made up of tendons. It has got the synovial fluid, and it has cartilages. you are made up of bones, and you don't have one bone. You have about 205 bones, and usually these bones need to be attached to each other. There has to be a system that joins them to each other to give us the desirable shape and support framework which we have. So ligament is always an inelastic tissue, and it usually connects one bone to another bone. Tendons are also inelastic tissue. However, these ones connect a muscle to another bone. Remember, our support framework is always brought about by the coordination between the muscles and the bones. Synovial fluid is always a type of fluid we sometimes find in certain joints in our bodies, and they perform a critical role in reducing friction at the joints, and of course also providing nourishment to the cells we find at these joints. And a cartilage is also a connective tissue, just like the bones. The only difference being that they are not as rigid as the bones. They have some degree of flexibility that is lacking in the bones. If you could hold your pinna or your ear right now, you find it is firm, yes, but then the structure on the inside, you are relatively able to flex it briefly. So the cartilages are always relatively flexible compared to the hard bones. Now, the other type of skeleton is the hydrostatic skeleton, very common in annelids like the earthworms. And this is always some skeleton brought about by some fluid that is entrapped between the body cavities of these organisms. When the muscles contract and press against this fluid, it gives these organisms the adequate support they need. But for your syllabus needs, we are not going to delve much into the details of the hydrostatic skeletons, but this is a skeleton due to a fluid that is entrapped between the cavities of most of these annelids. Now over to locomotion in a bony fish. There's need for us to be able to review locomotion in a bony fish. How do the fishes locomote? So the very key questions that you need to understand here are the following. We can ask you to describe locomotion in a bony fish for 20 marks. You can ask you also to describe how a bony fish is adapted to locomotion in water. We can also ask you to describe the main challenges that fish face in water. Remember, water is relatively a viscous medium, and moving in water is different from moving terrestrially like we do. So, of course, there are challenges that the aquatic medium presents to the fishes compared to the other organisms that just walk on land. We always have various types of fins in fishes. We have paired fins and unpaired fins. You need to be able to identify them and state their roles. And then, of course, finally, something about the tail power. What is it in a fish? How is it calculated? And what is its significance? Now, how does a fish locomote in water? Fish usually locomotes in water through swimming, and there are a number of features which facilitate and adapt the fish to swimming in water. But before we look at these features, these adaptive features which facilitate swimming for the fish, it is need for us to understand some of the challenges the fishes are likely to experience when swimming in water. Some of the main locomotory challenges that the fishes usually experience are the following. We have what we call rolling, we have what we call pitching, and we have what we call yawing. When we talk about rolling, it is the tendency of the fish to flip over to its side or along its horizontal axis, like what you can see in this illustration here. You can see the fish wants to move forward. Okay, it's like it's moving to us, right? But you can see there's a tendency of a force trying to flip it over. This could be due to the water currents. So you can see it is being pushed over its side horizontally. So that is what we refer to as rolling. And we also have what we refer to as yawing, and yawing is basically the lateral deflection of a fish by the water currents. Look at this fish. Perhaps it wants to maintain this trajectory and to go in this direction that I'm highlighting with the arrow. But due to the water currents, there might be some force tending to deflect it from its course so that it is moving towards the right side or being change its course towards the left side there. So that will be yawing. Then, of course, if you look at this other illustration representing pitching, this fish wants to move in this direction. I'm again representing with the arrow here. But due to water currents, there might be the tendency of the fish tending to plunge its head downwards or upwards in a vertical axis. So the tendency of the fish to plunge its head downwards in water, or the force that tends to make it want to change its head to move upwards in the water column, that one is pitching. So while a fish will be swimming, it has to possess features that will enable it to navigate and overcome these challenges. Sometimes I find the aeroplane aspect helping me explain these challenges also well. If you look at this, it's an aeroplane. This is the axis it is moving upon. This red line is representing the trajectory it needs to maintain going in this direction. But you can see there can be a force, will be like the turbulent air currents, tending to want to either lift the head of the plane upwards or downwards. So this one is the aspect of pitching. Look at this other case. Assuming this aeroplane is to fly directly towards you now, the way you're seeing it. This is the horizontal axis you're expecting it to maintain, but you can see there can be a force that is tending to make it tilt towards the left wing or tilt towards the right wing. As you can see from these arrows, it's now slightly tilted to the side. Now that one is rolling. And of course, we are having yawing. For yawing, look at this line again, the red line indicating that this plane needs to maintain this trajectory and fly in this direction. But due to the water currents, you can see its head is slightly deflected off course laterally. So this one is what we refer to as yawing. So usually the fishes usually have a number of adaptations which enable them to overcome these challenges. And the fish usually has a number of fins to enable them swim effectively. We have the pectoral fin, we have the pelvic fin. These fins are referred to as paired fins. We say they're paired because they always occur in pairs. And this means like now we are having this one as the left pectoral fin. On the other side, we also have the right pectoral fin. Here we have the left pelvic fin. It means on the other side of the fish, we'll also be expecting to find the right pelvic fin. However, the dorsal fin, this one here, the anal fin and the caudal fin are always unpaired. The paired fins are very important in controlling pitching. And of course, this one is very easy to remember. PPP, paired fins, pelvic and pectoral, they prevent pitching. And however, the anal fin, the caudal fin, and the dorsal fin, these ones are always known to control yawing and also rolling. In addition to controlling pitching, the paired fins are also very important in steering the fish forward apart from steering the fish forward, they are also very important in enabling the fish to break, and also very important in enabling the fish to change direction in water. Of course, the caudal fin is also very important in propelling the fish forward as the fish moves in water. So the bony fishes usually have the fins for swimming, and as we have said, they can be paired or they can be unpaired, and then they carry out those roles which have been highlighted in the slide we just talked about. So how does a fish locomote in water? Other than the fins we have talked about, fishes also always have blocks of muscles on the right side of the skeleton and on the left side. These blocks of muscles, we always refer to them as myotomes. Remember, this is also actually common with most chordates as a characteristic feature. So these muscles on the left and right sides, they always contract and relax antagonistically. This means we cannot have a case where both muscles on the left and the right side, all of them are contracting at the same time, or all of them are relaxing at the same time. They always contract and relax in an antagonistic way, meaning if the ones on the left contract, the ones on the right will relax. If the ones on the left now relax, the ones on the right will then now contract. They always contract and relax in an antagonistic way. So whenever they contract and relax in an antagonistic way, this is going to create undulating movement like what you can see with these illustrations. And this undulating movement creates a forward thrust that propels the fish forward. So this enables the fish to move forward in water. And then now the fish will be using the paired fins for steering, braking, and changing direction. And the paired fins are also used to prevent pitching, and while the unpaired fins, as we've said, they always play a critical role in preventing yawing and rolling, ensuring that the fish is able to maintain its trajectory in water. So if you are to describe, if you're to ask, describe how bony fish locomotes in water, your essay will start from this point. You saying the bony fishes are saying the fishes usually locomote through swimming, and then you describe the possession of fins for that purpose, mentioning the types of fins and what they do, mentioning that the big role played by the myotomes, the muscles contracting and relaxing antagonistically to create the undulating movements which create the forward thrust, propelling the fish forward. Then you also mentioning the various roles that the fins play. And then, of course, you can also indicate that the fishes usually have a swim bladder. The swim bladder becomes important. This is always filled with air to enable the fish adjust its vertical position in water. So if it is filled with air, the fish will develop a less apparent weight, so it floats towards the upper surface. But when it is deflated, of course, the fish will descend lower. So using this, the fish is able to adjust its vertical position in water, depending on its locomotory needs at any given time it is moving in water. Similarly, we can then now ask you to describe how a bony fish like a tilapia is adapted to locomotion in water. And there's so many adaptations you can always talk about. So the common adaptation you can always talk about here. Remember, the fish has got a streamlined body shape. This is important in reducing resistance to movement. The fishes usually have paired fins, critical in controlling pitching. They have unpaired fins, critical in controlling yawing and rolling. But of course, remember the paired fins can also be critical for braking, steering, and changing direction. Then again, if you were to stroke a fish, assuming this is your fish, and you are to stroke it, you will realize that if you are to stroke it in the direction from the head towards the tail, it will always be smooth. But if you are to stroke it from the tail towards the head, then we always find it is always rough. This is as a result of the fact that in a fish, the scales are always arranged backwards in an overlapping manner. This is meant to minimize resistance to water as the fish locomotes in water. And again, the fishes usually have inflexible head. This is very important in enabling them to maintain a forward thrust. Then, of course, we have talked about the presence of the myotomes, whose contractions and relaxations create undulating movements, propelling the fish forward. Of course, it has got the swim bladder that can be filled with air that can be deflated to enable it to adjust its vertical position in water. And if you have interacted with fresh fish, you'll always realize that if you run your fingers along its length, it tends to be slimy. This is because it has got mucus glands secreting mucus on its surface, which helps in reducing friction during movement. Of course, for the previous illustration, the previous slide, you must have also seen a structure known as the lateral line. This is always meant for sensitivity, enabling the fish to detect changes in vibrations and pressure changes in water to enable it to move appropriately. Then, of course, if you look at the fish, you'll always realize the body is laterally flattened. This increases its vertical surface area, hence preventing rolling and yawing. Over to the last other objective we listed on the tail power. The tail power is always calculated by measuring the length from the tail to the tip of the anus of the fish, dividing by the entire length of the fish times 100. And usually a high tail power in a fish reflects high propulsive power of that fish. So that brings us to the end of this. And what is the recap I need you to have? The key takeaway for this session is that you need to be able to define what a skeleton is for the animals. It is simply a rigid support framework that animals possess. The three main types of skeleton, we have listed them: exoskeleton, endoskeleton, and hydrostatic skeleton. We have just described the importance of skeleton. You need to be able to list them. And also you need to be able to describe locomotion in a bony fish. What are the various roles that the fins play in locomotion in fishes, and also about the adaptations of the bony fish to locomotion. And also remember, we have the various challenges that to locomotion that the fishes always experience, and you need to be able to list them and describe them: yawing, rolling, and pitching. Until the next video, bye-bye.